As the Democrats get in line behind Vice President Kamala Harris to replace President Biden as their nominee for president, the Trump campaign and other Republicans must pivot. After 3.5 years of buildup for a contest against the failed record of President Biden and his family and all that goes along with that, the vice president's public appearances may be riddled with verbal gaffes and empty cliches. Her policy record as California Attorney General and as the junior senator from the state demonstrate a commitment to targeting conservatives while embracing every priority of the left. So, what can we learn from this record? Joining me now to discuss this, Dan McLaughlin. He's a senior fellow at the National Review Institute and a senior writer at National Review Online. Dan, welcome to Washington Watch.
Glad to be here.
So Vice President Harris is often the punchline of, conservatives because she has so many gaffes that she talks about, things that she talks about. But there's a record behind her. It's not just, speeches with great takeaway lines. She's got a record. And what does that record tell us?
Yeah, I mean, if you dig past the past 4 years of cliches into her campaign promises when she ran for president and the ways in which she used power as a California Attorney General and as a United States Senator, the picture is much more menacing. Harris repeatedly announced that she was intended to use executive power in very, very broad ways to just unilaterally override the Constitution and the president's limits on the president's power. She openly laughed at one point when she suggested, for example,
did she laugh or cackle?
I think cackled, perhaps.
Okay.
When she said that she wanted to seize guns, basically, and even Joe Biden on the debate stage said, "Wait a minute, you can't do that. The Constitution won't let you." And she laughed at the whole idea of the Constitution limiting her power. I think if you look at her record as Attorney General, there's really menacing things. She was really the one who instituted the prosecution of David Daleiden for investigating Planned Parenthood. She was the one behind the effort to force nonprofits to disclose their donors. And then badly mishandling the confidential information that was handed over to the California AG's office.
Right, which that was a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, if I recall correctly, it was a 9-0 decision. I mean, that you talk about a slapdown.
Yeah, they got their heads handed to them for violating the First Amendment, and a lot of even very liberal interest groups came out and said that the argument that the California Attorney General's office was making was wrong. Even the Biden administration's own brief didn't really defend Harris's record there. It kind of ran away from it. So it's an ominous sign to how she uses power when she has it.
But Dan, let's talk about something that I think, this is my thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that some may be misled by her verbal gaffes and the nonsensical stuff that she says. She's actually a pretty astute political operative when you look at what she has done with the power that she has had at different times.
I mean, she's certainly maximized the power that she had, both as AG and as a senator. It remains to be seen whether she could fully operate those levers as president. I think she's much more menacing in that role than she is. What's yet to be proven is how she campaigned. But if she has the power, I think she will surround herself with people who know how to use it, and intend to use it ruthlessly. I mean, if you remember during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, for example, she was one of the people who read into the congressional record the ridiculous Michael Avenatti gang rape allegations against Kavanaugh, which were completely implausible.
So, Dan, what type of candidate do we think that she makes when we've looked back at her record as a political candidate?
I don't think she's actually a very good candidate. Her first run for office, she got 46% of the vote statewide in California, which is not great for a Democrat. Her one election to the Senate, the California system kept any Republican off the ballot. And when she ran for president, she got massacred. and had to drop out very, very early. But, there will be a lot of institutional and financial efforts put behind her to rally the Democratic base to move on from, certainly she doesn't have the age vulnerability of Biden. They're going to come out with a certain amount of vigor and probably a little bit of a honeymoon on the campaign just from the relief of being able to move on from Biden.
Dan, do we know what motivates her? I mean, what's the driving force behind her? I mean, we know some people get in politics for different reasons. What seems to be the motivating factor in her political career?
I would say power. I mean, she has pursued and seized power whenever she could. And how much of her leftism is sincere and how much of it is political pandering is always hard to tell. But I think she spent her whole career in places where she didn't even have to talk to people who disagreed with her, didn't have to consider their views, and didn't have to respect their rights. And so, I think that produces somebody who really is not at all inclined to respect, religious liberty and the rights of pro-lifers or simply due process of law.
Now, the next president, this of course is the case every time, but we go to the courts, we go to the Supreme Court, we go to the vacancies on the court. President Trump, that was a defining element of his 4 years, the Supreme Court. I think actually Biden, he's been at record number, been putting people to the lower courts. I think that could be a part of his legacy. What do we know about her as it pertains to the courts?
Well, I mean, first of all, she supported court packing openly during her presidential run. Biden has been teasing something like that the past few weeks, which presumably will go back to the repair shop now to see if it'll come out something different with Harris. She was she was on the Senate Judiciary Committee, real slash and burn. I mean, she grilled one nominee over his belonging to the Knights of Columbus, which is completely mainstream Catholic organization. So Harris is somebody who is going to care a lot about the courts, a lot about stocking it with real hard-edged progressive activists.
Speaking of those activists, hard-edged activists, during the George Floyd riots, she supported a fund to bail out the rioters, those who were burning and looting.
Yeah, which is not only ominous, but it really undercuts sort of the biggest asset she has in terms of trying to sell herself as something other than a straight down the line leftist is the fact that she was a prosecutor. She can say I was tough on crime, but I think some of her actions since then undercut that, as well as some of the things that she's, supported the Biden administration doing, whether it be in immigration law or other areas.
Dan McLaughlin, let me ask you this question. She's especially really in the last year, she had kind of taken a back seat. We really hadn't seen or heard much from her other than when they wanted to talk about abortion, and then she came out, talked about abortion. Her numbers did not look good. But of course, now everyone's rallying behind her. Is this just because, they have no other option, or is this because they feel like this is all being driven just by a hatred of Donald Trump? It doesn't seem like she has a strong political constituency.
No, she'll have to essentially sort of fabricate one. If you look at the past several years, Joe Biden was popular when he came into office. His approval rating sagged within a few months after Afghanistan and has never really recovered. Donald Trump, frankly, has been unpopular, more unpopular than popular for the entirety of the time that he's been in public. And yet Harris, if you look consistently from the very beginning of the Biden administration, has been very consistently in polling, more unpopular than Biden, more unpopular than Trump, more unpopular than just about any other major figure in national politics. There are clear majorities who have disapproved of her from the beginning. So she is going to have a lot of work to do to be able to repair that, particularly in the handful of Midwestern swing states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, that are almost certain to decide this election.
So what's driving that unpopularity for her?
I think it's a variety of things. Clearly, part of it is simply her political profile as a true California progressive who is kind of out of step with the rest of the country. And part of it is personality. She just does, she comes across as sort of condescending and somewhat, I would say more forced than artificial, but a little bit artificial. She's somebody who kind of puts on what feels like an act. And one of the interesting things, if you look at public polling, is a fair number of people, when they really ask them, they're not sure why they don't like Harris. They just don't. But that's a hard thing to fix, because if people just don't like you, they just don't like you.
Yeah, that is, and you've got a very short window. I mean, there's a short runway to try to change that with just 100 days before the election. Dan McLaughlin, I want to thank you for joining us. Insightful, and I know you've got a piece that's out there. We'll have that up on the website as well, so people can take a closer look at her record. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having me.